6 hours after giving birth, while the fluorescent lights of the postpartum recovery room flickered faintly above me, I pressed my trembling thumb against the screen of my phone and opened the home camera app, expecting nothing more than a quick glance at my old Beagle Scout sleeping in his usual spot beside the nursery dresser. My incision ached with every breath, and the weight of my newborn daughter rested gently against my chest as I tried to steady myself. I told myself I was just looking for comfort. Something familiar, something normal in a moment that felt anything but normal. My husband Ryan had left the hospital 6 hours earlier, promising he would be right back. He told the nurse he simply needed to run home for 5 minutes to grab the overnight bag he forgot in the rush to get me into triage. The nurse had even reassured me with a smile that husbands freeze up all the time during labor, that a little fresh air would probably help him calm down. After all, Ryan had experienced a mild panic attack outside the operating room when they prepped me for an unplanned C-section. The staff had noted it, spoken to him gently, and let him step away. The hospital could not keep him there, even if I silently wished they could have, because the truth was that Ryan had a history of melting under pressure. But 6 hours had passed. 6 hours without a single text call or message. 6 hours of silence while I lay in a bed, unable to stand on my own, holding our daughter alone and praying nothing had gone wrong. My mind, raw and hormonal and exhausted, spun in circles. Maybe his phone died. Maybe he fell asleep. Maybe he fainted at home. Maybe traffic was bad. Maybe he was panicking again. Maybe he never should have left in the first place. My pulse pounded as I opened the app, waiting for the little spinning circle to load the nursery camera. Scout usually curled up under the crib, and just seeing him would help me breathe again. The screen blinked once, then sharpened into an image that made my heart drop through the mattress. It was not Scout. It was not my dog at all. Instead, standing in the center of the nursery, as calm as if she owned the place, was my mother-in-law, Lorraine Carter. She wore her usual navy cardigan and pearl earrings, the ones she claimed were heirlooms, though I suspected she had bought them at a department store and built a story around them just to feel important. She held a ring of keys in one hand, dangling casually. Keys I had asked Ryan to take back months ago. Keys he promised he would collect, but clearly never did. Behind her stood a man I had never seen before. He was tall, late 50s perhaps, with a gray beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried a large black duffel bag that looked uncomfortably heavy. My breath turned sharp and thin. My incision throbbed. My vision blurred. I blinked hard, convinced I was hallucinating from the pain medication, but no, they were real. My mother-in-law stepped further into the room, turning slowly, assessing everything with an expression that tightened my stomach. Then she reached up and adjusted the camera, not enough to turn it off, but just enough to angle it away from her face, as if she did not want anyone to see what was about to happen. I whispered no under my breath, the word barely forming. My daughter stirred against my hospital gown, sensing my panic. I held her tighter, trying to keep my breathing steady, but nausea curled through me. Lorraine set her purse on the rocking chair and glanced toward the doorway, as if expecting someone else. The man set the duffel bag next to the crib, unzipped it halfway, and I saw the edge of something white and folded. I strained to understand what I was seeing. Clothes, bedding documents. Why would this man be in my house? Why would my mother-in-law bring him there hours after I had given birth without telling me or Ryan? Then Lorraine spoke. Her voice floated through the audio feed, thin and sharp. She said she will not be strong enough to raise this baby. Even from the hospital bed, I felt the sting like a slap across my face. My chest tightened. My incision burned. I stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to think. Lorraine looked around the nursery like she was inventorying what belonged to her, what she believed she had a right to. The man nodded once, then stepped out of the frame. The audio picked up rustling, something being lifted, something heavy being placed down. Lorraine walked closer to the camera, her face partially visible again, and for a brief moment I saw a cold determination in her eyes. Not worry, not concern, determination. The same look she used whenever she pushed boundaries and expected everyone to submit. I tried to call nurse, but my fingers shook uncontrollably. Pain shot down my side as I reached for the call button. The camera flickered once more as if someone's hand had brushed against it, then went completely black. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The air thinned. The walls of the recovery room felt like they were tilting. I held my daughter tighter, my heart hammering against her tiny body. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to dial 911, but my fingers were shaking too badly. I pressed the screen but could not finish the numbers. Tears blurred everything. I tried again and again. My hand refused to obey me. My vision tunneled. My breath hitched. The phone slid from my grasp and hit the bed with a dull thud. I stared at the black screen of the camera feed, my pulse spiraling as the horrifying truth settled over me. My husband had not fled the hospital because of panic. He had fled because of her. And something inside my home was happening right now. Something she never intended for me to see. Before everything spiraled into the nightmare unfolding on that tiny phone screen before the hospital lights blurred and the camera went dark, I used to tell myself that my marriage was solid enough to withstand anything. I met Ryan Carter when I was 26, teaching second grade at the elementary school in our small South Carolina town. He walked into my classroom during a parent-teacher conference week to deliver promotional materials for a fundraiser his marketing company was sponsoring. He smiled at me with the kind of gentle charm that made you believe he listened carefully, even if he did not always understand. He was handsome in a clean-cut way with a softness around the eyes that made him seem safe. I needed safe at that time. I had just lost my father to a heart attack and had been struggling to keep myself grounded in a world that suddenly felt unpredictable. Ryan asked me out 2 weeks later, and though I hesitated at first, his kindness soon became a warm place for me to settle. When we married a year after dating, I thought I had found a partner who valued gentle partnership. What I did not fully grasp was that Ryan had been raised under the strangling shadow of his mother, Lorraine Carter. Lorraine was 60 at the time, but she possessed a forcefulness that filled every room she entered. She believed she was always right, always smarter, always morally superior. She had raised Ryan alone after his father left when he was 4, and she wore that story like a badge of martyrdom. She told it often. To strangers at grocery stores, to waiters, to neighbors, to me. Everything she did, every boundary she crossed, every manipulative comment she whispered she justified by reminding people she was a single mother who had sacrificed everything. The first time I saw her dynamic with Ryan, I should have paid more attention. He called her every morning before work. She texted him constantly during the day, and if he did not reply within a few minutes, she sent strings of guilt-laced messages. I miss my son. Do you not care anymore? Am I just here to be forgotten? Ryan always defended her. She has been through a lot. She just wants to feel included. That line became his favorite attempt at soothing me whenever Lorraine pushed beyond limits that should never have been crossed. When we bought our first home, Lorraine insisted on being at every step from the inspection to the closing. She even wanted to walk through the house with the real estate agent making notes as if she were the buyer. When I suggested she give us space to make our own decisions, she cried in the front yard loudly enough that neighbors peeked through blinds. Ryan panicked and apologized to her over and over until she sniffed dramatically and forgave him with a dismissive wave. I stood 6 feet away, feeling like an outsider in my own life. 6 months into the marriage, I changed the front door locks because the old ones stuck and sometimes jammed. I texted Lorraine simply to let her know because she had a spare key from when she watered our plants during a vacation. The next morning, she was on our porch at 7:30, pounding on the door and demanding to know why I had locked her out of her son's home. Ryan scrambled to comfort her, apologizing repeatedly while she theatrically clutched her chest. When I calmly explained that homeowners change locks all the time, Lorraine said she felt unsafe, unwelcome, and disrespected. Ryan spent the rest of the day trying to smooth things over with her while I sat alone at the kitchen table, realizing that my marriage involved not just one person, but a mother-son unit welded together in a way that left no room for me. But the real shift happened when I became pregnant. We had been trying for almost a year, and when that faint blue line appeared on the test, I cried with relief. Ryan cried too, holding me tightly and promising he would be the best father. For a brief moment, it felt like everything would finally settle into place. That moment did not last. The very day we told Lorraine, she clasped her hands together dramatically as if auditioning for a stage play and declared she had waited her whole life for this. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. She said this baby is a Carter, not a Carter-Jones hybrid. I had never hyphenated my name, but she always made comments implying my family was lesser. I laughed awkwardly, thinking she must be joking, but the cold glimmer in her eyes told me she was perfectly serious. From that point on, she inserted herself into every part of my pregnancy. She insisted on attending every ultrasound. She tried to choose the name, rejecting any suggestion I offered as too modern or too weak. She purchased furniture for the nursery without asking us and had it delivered to our doorstep. When I told her gently that I appreciated the gesture, but we had our own theme planned, she said she had already spoken to Ryan and that he agreed her taste was more appropriate for a Carter baby. Ryan shrugged and said she meant well. When I reached the second trimester, Lorraine announced that she would be moving into our guest room for the first 3 months after the birth. She did not ask. She declared it like a royal decree. When I told her that was not happening, she accused me of wanting to keep her grandchild away from her. She said I was weak, inexperienced, and unprepared for motherhood. She told Ryan that I was turning him against his own mother. Ryan pleaded with me to let her stay at least a week. I held my ground. She reacted by withholding affection from him for 2 weeks, sending passive-aggressive messages like, "I am so proud of you, but I guess you do not need me anymore, or your wife has replaced me entirely." I began noticing other things too. She referred to the baby as her baby in every conversation. She introduced herself to strangers as a soon-to-be mother again instead of grandmother. She bragged about controlling all the nursery expenses even though she had only paid for a single set of shelves. And then 2 months before my due date, I discovered she had registered with a local daycare under her own name without telling us. When I confronted her, she said it was a backup plan in case I became overwhelmed. When I told Ryan this was crossing the line, he put his head in his hands and begged me to understand that he could not choose sides. That sentence haunted me. He could not choose sides. Marriage was not supposed to have sides. But with Lorraine, everything became a contest for control. I wanted to believe Ryan would protect me when the baby arrived. I wanted to believe motherhood would soften Lorraine or at least distract her. Instead, the closer I got to my due date, the more possessive she became. She left bags of baby clothes on our porch without knocking. She lectured me about birth plans, insisting natural birth was the only acceptable option, even though my doctor said I might need a C-section. She even tried to join me in the doctor's office during a private appointment, claiming she needed to understand the medical plan because she was the grandmother. At that moment, my doctor asked her to wait outside. The look Lorraine gave me when the door closed was pure venom disguised behind a thin smile. Still, nothing prepared me for the level of chaos she unleashed the day I went into labor. I had always imagined the birth of my first child would be sacred, emotional, protected. Instead, it became the perfect storm of every red flag I had ignored for 3 years. A storm that swept through the hospital hallways and pushed Ryan into a panic so strong he fled the place where his wife and newborn daughter needed him the most. But none of that compared to what I saw on the camera 6 hours later. And none of it compared to what Lorraine had been planning all along. The day I went into labor started like any other late pregnancy morning, swollen and uncomfortable, my back aching and my nerves frayed from sleepless nights. I woke to a dull pressure low in my abdomen, something stronger than the Braxton Hicks contractions I had grown used to ignoring. By the time I made it to the kitchen, gripping the counter for balance, the pain sharpened and spread across my hips like a tightening band. I called Ryan, who had left for work early that morning, and told him I needed him to come home. He arrived in a rush, face-flushed keys shaking in his hands, as if he had been holding his breath since he got my call. It was the first sign that he was unraveling, though I tried to brush it aside. He helped me into the car, fumbling with the seatbelt like he had never used one before, and sped toward the hospital with a nervous chatter that made my stomach twist. He asked if I was sure it was time, if maybe we should wait, if maybe the pain was something else. I told him no, the contractions were 5 minutes apart. It was happening. When we arrived at the hospital, the nurses moved quickly, checking vitals, hooking me to monitors, speaking in the calm, steady voices of people who deal with panic every day. For a brief moment, I felt safe. That moment shattered the second Lorraine barged into the room. She appeared in the doorway with her purse slung over her shoulder and an expression that suggested this was her chosen battlefield. She did not greet me or ask how I was. Instead, she looked directly at my belly and said, "I hope you are not making a fuss over nothing." The contraction that hit me at that moment stole the breath from my lungs, and I squeezed Ryan's hand until my knuckles whitened. He tried to gently steer his mother back toward the hall, but she planted herself beside my bed, arms crossed, making tiny disapproving sounds each time I winced. When a nurse entered to check my dilation, Lorraine hovered so close that the nurse had to politely but firmly ask her to step aside. Lorraine huffed loudly and muttered that young women these days were so dramatic about childbirth. When another contraction tore through me, she leaned toward Ryan and whispered, "She needs to toughen up." I snapped at her, then a raw, pained burst of emotion telling her to leave the room. Lorraine's eyes filled instantly with tears. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and turned away dramatically. "I cannot believe you would speak to me like this. I came here to support you." Ryan, shocked and terrified of upsetting her, tried to soothe her, but the nurse intervened, suggesting that too many people in the room could stress the mother. Lorraine latched onto the word stress as if she were the victim and said she would wait in the hallway. She gave me one last wounded look before stepping out, the kind of look meant to twist guilt into my ribs. As soon as she left, I could finally breathe again. But Ryan began unraveling the moment the door shut. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair, muttering that he did not want his mother to feel excluded. He was sweating, trembling, unable to focus on me or what was happening. I tried to center him, reminding him I needed him present, but he seemed to be drifting somewhere far away in his mind. When the doctor entered and told me I needed an emergency C-section because the baby's heart rate was dipping, Ryan turned pale. I watched the color drain from his face the way it had once when he was younger and fainted during a blood draw. He swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair. The doctor spoke to him calmly, explaining everything, but Ryan's eyes darted frantically first toward me, then toward the hallway where Lorraine waited. The staff prepared to wheel me toward the operating room, and Ryan followed until we reached the double doors. A nurse explained that he could come in after changing into scrubs, but he needed a moment to breathe and stay calm. Lorraine, who had somehow drifted closer again, reached for his arm and pulled him aside. They spoke in hurried whispers, her voice sharp and urgent, his shaky and confused. I caught bits and pieces. She said something about not trusting the doctors, about wanting to protect the baby, about things I was too weak to process. Ryan looked torn in half, pulled between the woman giving birth to his child and the mother who had defined every decision of his life. As I was wheeled into the operating room, I saw him leaning against the wall, breathing rapidly, one hand pressed to his chest, as if he could not draw in enough air. The nurse whispered that he was having a panic attack and that they would help him, and for a moment I believed them. But when I woke from the surgery groggy and freezing under the thin hospital blanket, Ryan was nowhere in sight. The nurse handed me my daughter with a gentle smile and said, "Your husband should be back soon." He stepped out to grab a few things. I nodded because the alternative was admitting I was terrified. An hour passed, then 2, then 4. My calls went to voicemail. His phone location showed him at home, then turned off entirely. The nurse assured me some husbands get overwhelmed. The doctor said the same, but every passing minute felt heavier, more alarming. At the 6-hour mark, feeling abandoned and raw and frightened with surgical pain crawling through my abdomen, I reached for my phone and opened the home camera feed. I thought Ryan had gone home to pack clothes or rest or breathe. I thought maybe he had simply shut down from fear. But the truth was far worse. He had fled the hospital because Lorraine called him in a panic, telling him there was an emergency at our house, an emergency I did not yet understand, an emergency she created. And while he ran to her, I was left alone in a hospital bed holding our newborn daughter, completely unaware that the real crisis was playing out on the screen of a camera inside our nursery. When the nursery feed first flickered onto my phone, I thought the medication was distorting my vision. The image warped slightly, then focused sharply, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. My mother-in-law Lorraine stood in the middle of the nursery with the calm certainty of someone stepping into her own living room, not someone trespassing into a home where the mother had just given birth hours earlier. The overhead nightlight cast a soft glow on the pale blue walls we had painted together, but nothing about the room felt familiar anymore. Everything felt invaded, violated, wrong. Lorraine moved with deliberate purpose, the same purposeful stride I had seen at holiday gatherings when she oversaw everything as if she were choreographing a performance. She wore her navy cardigan buttoned all the way up and her pearl earrings her uniform of self-appointed authority. Her hand brushed the crib rail with an unsettling sense of ownership. Behind her, filling the doorway, was the man I had seen earlier, the stranger with the gray beard and baseball cap. This time, I saw his face more clearly. He was rough-looking, a weathered someone who had worked too many physical jobs or seen too many harsh years. He carried the large black duffel bag as if it weighed nothing, placing it carefully on the carpet near the changing table. My heart slammed against my ribs. Why was he in my house? Why would Lorraine bring someone like him inside without telling me or Ryan? And why was she acting like she had every right to be there? Lorraine turned toward the camera then, as if sensing eyes upon her. Her face appeared half in shadow, half illuminated by the glow of the hallway light. For a split second, she looked directly into the lens, and I felt the kind of primal fear that tightens every muscle in your body. She lifted her hand and gently nudged the camera upward just enough to shift the view away from her face. She did not turn it off. She did not unplug it. She simply adjusted it as if she knew I might be watching and wanted to control what I could see. That single gesture was more terrifying than if she had ripped the camera from the wall. It meant she was planning something and she did not want me to fully understand what it was. I could still see her torso and the man beside her. I could see the duffel bag unzipped halfway. Inside were folded white items, maybe blankets or clothes, and something that looked like paperwork tucked into a side pocket. Lorraine reached into her purse, pulled out a stack of papers, and handed them to the man. He skimmed them, briefly nodding. I strained to listen through the static-filled audio feed, my stitches aching as I leaned forward. Lorraine's voice floated through the speaker, clipped and firm. "She needs stability. She is too weak for this." That was when I realized she was talking about me. The man murmured something inaudible. Lorraine moved closer to the crib. Her tone sharpened. "We agreed this is the safest option. Ryan will understand once everything is settled." My heart pounded so hard I thought the monitor beside my hospital bed might start beeping. I clutched my daughter against my chest, terrified someone might appear in the doorway and take her from me. I pressed my phone closer to my ear, listening desperately for context, some explanation that would make this nightmare rational. But Lorraine continued in her calm, deliberate voice. "She said she will not be strong enough to raise this baby." The words sliced into me. Every insecurity, every doubt I had experienced during pregnancy, every moment Lorraine had undermined me, every time Ryan had apologized for her behavior, everything crashed into me at once. The man asked something that the audio struggled to catch, but I heard one phrase clearly enough to make me feel sick. "When do we move the baby things?" Move them where? To her house. To some other place. To some place she believed she deserved to raise my newborn daughter. My throat closed as I gasped for air. I felt the edges of the room bending, spinning. I tried to hit the call button for the nurse again, but my hands trembled uncontrollably. I attempted to steady my breathing, but panic surged through me. The camera captured Lorraine moving toward the closet, now opening the door and examining the neatly hung baby clothes. She touched the pink onesie I had purchased on a quiet Saturday morning, imagining my baby wearing it home from the hospital. She held it up, looked at it critically, then placed it into the duffel bag. My vision blurred. I could not blink. I could not breathe. I could not understand how she had crossed from intrusive mother-in-law to someone planning something deeply disturbing. The man lifted a small storage bin from a shelf and placed it beside the bag. Inside were diapers, pacifiers, a swaddle blanket. The blanket was one my sister-in-law had given me at the baby shower. Lorraine tossed it aside like a piece of trash, then replaced it with a different blanket from her bag, a soft white one embroidered with the name Carter across the corner. I felt nauseated. She had prepared for this. She had purchased items as if she were outfitting her own nursery. The man spoke again, and though the audio crackled, I heard the words, paperwork and signatures, and before she comes home. Lorraine pressed the stack of documents against the changing table and smoothed them with her palm. Even through the grainy resolution of the camera, I recognized the top corner of the page. Temporary guardianship. The same form I would find later on the floor, confirming my worst fear. She was not just taking baby things. She was preparing to take my baby. I shook so hard the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. My daughter whimpered lightly against me, sensing my distress. I held her tighter, whispering, "It is okay," even though nothing felt okay anymore. A nurse passed by my room just then, but I could not call out. My throat felt sealed, my mind frozen between fear and disbelief. The camera feed flickered again as the man stepped closer to the device. For a moment, his hand covered the lens, casting everything into darkness. When the image returned, it was angled sharply toward the ceiling, only showing the faint outline of the light fixture. The audio caught Lorraine's voice, faintly more guarded now. "Hurry! She will be discharged soon." My pulse thudded in my ears. How could she know that? How could she know when I would be discharged unless Ryan told her, unless he was already involved in some way? But that made no sense. Ryan had melted down at the hospital. He had fled in a panic. He was not capable of planning anything. Yet Lorraine's certainty gnawed at me like a warning. The man zipped the duffel bag. I heard the sound of something dragging across the carpet. Then the camera cut out completely. The screen went black, and with it, the tiny thread of understanding I clung to snapped. I tried to dial emergency services again, but my fingers shook violently. The number blurred each time I tried to tap it. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to focus, but the panic was too sharp, too consuming. My daughter began to cry, a soft newborn wail, and that sound jolted through me like electricity. I looked from her tiny face to the dead camera feed, feeling a terror I had never experienced. Something was happening in my home. Something Lorraine had planned, and I had no way of stopping it. I finally managed to press the call button on the hospital bed, and as the nurse hurried in, I clutched my daughter and whispered the words that would start everything. "Someone is in my house." The moment the words left my lips, the nurse froze, her expression shifting from routine concern to sharp alertness. She stepped closer, her gaze flicking from my pale face to the baby cradled against my chest. I repeated myself, my voice cracking. "Someone is in my house." The nurse pressed the emergency call button on the wall, and within seconds, another nurse and a supervising clinician entered the room. I told them I had seen my mother-in-law and a strange man in my nursery through the home camera. My voice shook so badly that I had to grip the bed rail to keep from collapsing forward. The clinician gently took my phone, stared at the black screen, and asked what exactly I had seen. As I described everything from Lorraine entering with keys to the man with the duffel bag to the guardianship papers, I felt the room tilt again. The nurses exchanged glances that were professional but unmistakably concerned. One of them left the room to call hospital security, while the clinician tried to steady me with slow, careful breathing reminders. She must have seen the panic attack building under my skin. The security officer who arrived was a young woman with a firm voice. She asked me to repeat everything in as much detail as possible. I told her about the camera being angled, the duffel bag, the paperwork, the stranger. As I spoke, my daughter fussed and pressed her tiny face into my chest as if trying to hide from something unseen. The officer asked if anyone had permission to be inside my home. I told her no. Lorraine had an old key that I had asked Ryan to reclaim, but she certainly did not have permission to enter while I was in the hospital. And the man was a complete stranger. The officer nodded, her expression darkening. "That is unauthorized entry. I want you to stay calm. We will contact police." She stepped out to make the call, and when she returned, she said a patrol unit was on the way to my home to perform a wellness check. The words "wellness check" rang in my ears. They made the situation sound benign, like a routine safety visit, when everything inside me screamed that the situation was anything but routine. I imagined the stranger carrying the duffel bag out of the house, imagined Lorraine packing baby items that did not belong to her, Imagined them taking something else, something far more precious. I held my daughter closer, feeling the warmth of her tiny body as tears filled my eyes. I kept whispering that I was here, that I was with her, even though she was too young to understand. A detective arrived within the hour, a woman in her 40s with calm authority in her posture. She introduced herself as Detective Marla Ortiz and asked if I felt well enough to answer questions. I nodded, though every part of me trembled. She pulled up a chair and opened a small notebook while keeping her voice soft and steady. She asked for names, relationships, prior incidents, anything that might indicate motive or history. I explained that Lorraine had always been controlling, especially during my pregnancy. I told her how she had insisted the baby would be a Carter first and everything else second. How she made comments about my ability to parent. How she had shown up unwanted to doctor appointments. How she had tried to move into our home for weeks at a time. How Ryan always defended her or minimized her behavior. Detective Ortiz listened without interruption. She asked if I had ever seen or heard of the man in the video before. I told her no. She asked for details about the duffel bag, what I had heard them say, and what Lorraine did when she entered the nursery. I described it all in a single, exhausted breath, my voice cracking as I reached the part about her lifting the baby clothes and placing them into the bag. The detective's expression tightened. She asked if I had seen any weapons or signs of forced entry. I said no weapon, no force because they did not need force. She had keys. That statement seemed to shift the tone in the room. The detective wrote something down quickly and said that keys did not override the legal definition of unauthorized entry. She then asked if the camera angle change looked intentional. I told her yes. The detective nodded again, her jaw tightening. That is attempted concealment of activity. It supports probable cause. Those words felt both terrifying and relieving. Terrifying because it meant the situation was as serious as I felt it to be. Relieving because it meant someone with authority finally recognized that seriousness. While we spoke, my phone buzzed in my lap. My hands shook as I glanced at the screen. It was hospital security forwarding me a message from the responding police unit. They had arrived at my house. They were going inside. I felt my stomach churn. I asked the detective if they could FaceTime me or show me what they found, but she said no, that police procedure required they assess privately first. I felt helpless, completely powerless. The detective put a gentle hand on the rail of my bed and told me they would keep me updated. Minutes later, her phone rang. She stepped out of the room. When she returned, her face was serious but not alarmed. She said the officers found no one in the house, no sign of the stranger or Lorraine, no sign of forced entry, no baby items obviously missing from the nursery. The duffel bag was gone. The camera was unplugged and placed on the rocking chair. That was enough to confirm unlawful tampering. She added that the officers noticed drawers opened and clothes displaced, but nothing destroyed or chaotic. This was important, she explained, because it meant someone had been searching or collecting, not vandalizing. The sight of my nursery being quietly dismantled by someone who believed she had a right to raise my child made my skin crawl. I told the detective about the papers I saw. She asked if I had ever signed anything related to guardianship. I said absolutely not. She nodded and said that if such documents were found in the home even unsigned, they could support a case for custodial interference. Another officer called in to confirm they found no documents, but they did find a torn envelope near the closet. That could have been part of the stack I saw. My chest tightened again. The detective asked if Ryan knew about the guardianship forms. I said I did not know, but the thought made me sick. As she asked more questions, she requested the camera footage so she could submit it as evidence. She asked if the stranger had touched anything identifiable, like furniture or toys. I said I could not see clearly. She nodded, writing rapidly. The nurse finally stepped in to remind everyone that I had just undergone major surgery and needed medical monitoring. Detective Ortiz softened her expression and said she would return in a few hours. She told me she would be interviewing Ryan next. Something about that made everything inside me twist. Before she left, she met my eyes and said one last thing with quiet certainty. This is not normal conflict. What you described is deeply concerning. We will figure out what happened, but you and your daughter are safe here. I clutched my baby tighter, looking down at her peaceful face, trying to believe those words, even as dread settled into my bones. Something terrible was unfolding, and all signs pointed back to the same person. Lorraine had crossed a line, and the worst part was that I had no idea how far she planned to go. The hospital released me the next afternoon with instructions to move slowly, avoid stairs if possible, and monitor my incision for signs of infection. But none of those warnings compared to the dread tightening in my chest as Detective Ortiz arranged for a patrol car to escort me home. I held my daughter in her car seat beside me, every bump in the road sending a jolt of pain through my abdomen. The detective followed in a separate vehicle, promising she would walk through the house with me once we arrived. As we drove down the familiar streets of our quiet South Carolina neighborhood, everything felt surreal. The same front porches decorated with hanging ferns, the same trimmed lawns, the same friendly houses with pastel shutters all looked slightly unreal, like a backdrop that no longer belonged to me. When the patrol car slowed in front of my home, my breath caught in my throat. The driveway looked untouched, the flower beds still neat, the porch light off, just as we had left it. Nothing from the outside revealed the trespass that had occurred only hours earlier. The officer opened my car door gently and offered to carry the car seat, but I refused. I needed to hold my daughter, needed to know where she was every second. The moment my feet touched the ground, I felt dizzy. The incision beneath my hospital gown throbbed, and I steadied myself against the door frame as the officer guided me toward the porch. The detective joined us, her presence steady and grounding. She asked me to wait outside for a moment while she and the officer conducted a brief sweep of the main floor. Standing alone on the porch, cradling my daughter while warm air brushed my face, I felt more exposed than I ever had in my life. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting Lorraine's face to appear behind the glass. The minutes stretched endlessly until the detective returned and motioned me inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, a chill ran down my spine. Everything looked almost normal. Too normal. The living room smelled the same faint lavender scent I always used. The lamp on the side table sat upright. The throw blanket on the couch was folded neatly in its usual spot. If I had not seen the camera footage with my own eyes, I might have believed nothing had happened. But the moment I turned toward the hallway leading to the nursery, the illusion collapsed. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, and something about the angle made my skin prickle. I pushed it open with my elbow. The room smelled faintly of the baby detergent we had used on the clothes only days before, but underneath that soft scent was something else. Something metallic and unsettling. Maybe just the anxiety pulsing in my veins. My eyes scanned the room, and the changes were subtle but unmistakable. The top drawer of the dresser hung open by an inch, though I always shut it fully. The lid of the diaper pail was slightly askew. One of the tiny socks I had carefully folded lay on the floor as if someone had dropped it while rushing. The camera, once mounted near the ceiling, now sat unplugged on the rocking chair exactly as the police had reported. Seeing it up close, lifeless and useless, filled me with a deep sense of violation. That camera had been my eyes when I could not be home, and now it had been manipulated, silenced, and discarded. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady as I asked the detective to check the closet. She opened the door and flipped on the light. The baby clothes still hung neatly, but on the floor was a small envelope torn in half edges, jagged as if someone had opened it quickly. I recognized the color and texture immediately. It looked exactly like the envelope containing guardianship forms that I had seen on the camera. The detective used gloves to pick up both pieces carefully and placed them into an evidence bag. She told me they would be analyzed, but that even their presence suggested premeditation. I felt my stomach twist. I walked slowly to the changing table and noticed another detail I had missed in the chaos. The soft white blanket embroidered with the name Carter was gone. In its place was the swaddle blanket my sister had gifted me. Lorraine had swapped them. She had begun reorganizing the nursery as if preparing it for a home she believed was more fitting. My throat tightened and my eyes stung. I sank carefully onto the edge of the glider chair, wincing as my incision pressed against the cushion. I held my daughter close, inhaling her newborn scent to steady myself. The detective crouched beside me. her tone gentle as she explained that nothing pointed to an immediate physical threat. The intruders were gone. The house was empty, but she also said in a slow, measured voice that what Lorraine had done was not normal boundary crossing or grandmother excitement. It was deeply concerning behavior that suggested planning and intent. She reminded me that unauthorized entry and tampering with nursery items fell under several potential charges. My hands trembled around the blanket. I asked her why someone would bring a stranger into my home instead of coming alone. The detective said people who feel entitled sometimes recruit help to execute plans they believe are justified. It did not mean they intended physical harm, but it did mean they believed they had authority they did not possess. Her words made my body tense. The thought of Lorraine standing in this room, picking up baby clothes and planning where my daughter would sleep under her roof made me feel sick. After the detective finished documenting the scene, she asked if I wanted to stay somewhere else for the night. The idea of leaving my home felt unbearable, yet staying felt worse. I told her I wanted to stay because I needed to see what was missing, what had been touched, what had been changed. I needed to reclaim the space. She agreed, but suggested I sleep in the main room with the doors locked and keep my phone near me. She also recommended changing the locks as soon as possible. The officer returned from the final sweep and confirmed again that no one remained inside. But something in the air felt disturbed, like a room that had been breathed in by the wrong people. I walked through the rest of the house, noting subtle shifts I would never have noticed on a normal day. A throw pillow out of place, a drawer slightly open, a mug moved half an inch. They were all tiny things barely perceptible, yet each one whispered that I had not been here to protect my baby's space. By the time I made it back to the nursery, tears blurred my vision. My daughter slept peacefully in my arms, unaware of the fear coursing through me. I placed her gently into her crib, watching the way her fingers curled and uncurled as she dreamed. I touched the edge of the crib, tracing its smooth wooden rail. This room had been meant to be a sanctuary. Now it felt tainted. The detective stood in the doorway, observing me with quiet empathy. She told me she would check on me again that evening and that an officer would patrol the neighborhood through the night as a precaution. She gave me her number, telling me to call her the moment anything felt wrong. After she left, the house fell into a heavy silence. I sat beside my daughter, listening to her soft breathing, trying to convince myself we were safe. But in the hollow quiet of the nursery, one truth echoed louder than any reassurance. Lorraine had crossed a boundary so severe that no apology, no excuse, and no misunderstanding could ever justify it. And Ryan, who should have protected us, was still missing. I had no idea where he was or what role he might have unknowingly played in everything that had unfolded. The house was quiet, but it did not feel safe. Not anymore. Ryan returned at 3 in the morning, long after the patrol car had left and hours after I had forced myself to stay awake, despite the exhaustion pulling at every muscle in my body. I sat in the dim light of the living room with my daughter tucked in a bassinet beside me, the television on mute to keep me conscious, my mind cycling through fear, anger, betrayal, and confusion. When the front door finally opened, the soft click of the latch sent a shock through my chest. Ryan stepped inside, looking disheveled, pale, and jittery, like someone who had been running from a nightmare only to find himself in another. His hair was messy, as if he had pulled at it repeatedly. His shirt was wrinkled, stained with something that looked like spilled coffee. He froze when he saw me sitting upright, clutching the arm of the couch, my eyes burning with disbelief. "Emily," he whispered, his voice cracking around my name. I could not speak. My throat felt stiff, like every word had fused into stone. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, moving slowly as if approaching a wounded animal. His eyes scanned the living room, then drifted toward the hallway that led to the nursery before landing back on me. "You are home. Thank God you are home." I swallowed hard, the taste of bitterness rising with the motion. "Where have you been?" His face flinched as if the question struck him physically. He opened his mouth closed. It swallowed, then tried again. "Mom called me. She said there was something wrong at the house. She said someone might have broken in. She told me I needed to come immediately." My heart clenched. His words matched what I had suspected, but hearing them aloud still made me nauseous. "So, You left the hospital while I was in recovery, while I was holding our newborn alone. Ryan's voice shook. I did not know it would be so long. I thought I would come right back. I thought you would be sleeping after the surgery. I thought you thought what? That I would be fine alone, that I would not notice you were gone for 6 hours, that your mother needing you outweighed your wife having a major operation. He sank onto the ottoman across from me, burying his face in his palms. I wanted to feel something like sympathy, but anger surged too strongly. His shoulders trembled. I panicked. That was not an excuse, but it was the truth. I saw you in pain. I saw Mom crying in the hallway. I felt trapped. Trapped. The word echoed in the quiet room. You felt trapped. I pressed a hand against my abdomen, feeling the pull against my incision. And what did you think I felt? He lifted his head then, and the raw guilt in his eyes would have moved me once. Not tonight. I told him what the police found, what the detective documented, what the camera had captured. As I recounted every detail, Ryan's expression shifted from confusion to horror to denial, and then to a dawning realization that I could physically see settle across his face. When I mentioned the duffel bag, he swore he knew nothing about it. When I mentioned the man in the nursery, he said he had no idea who that was. When I described the guardianship papers, he hesitated only a second too long before admitting he had seen similar documents once. For emergencies, he said quietly, his voice barely audible. My mother made me sign something when I was 22 after my father died. She said it was in case something ever happened to me. I never read it. I was grieving. She took care of everything. I stared at him in disbelief, the pieces clicking together painfully. And when we got married, did she ever ask again? His hesitation was longer this time. Yes, once. Before we bought this house, she said couples should always have backup plans. She printed papers. I refused to sign them, but she tried. That hesitation told me everything. Lorraine had been planning for years. She saw every part of Ryan's life as something she should manage, mold, and control. And now she saw our child as an extension of that control. A piece she believed she could reclaim if she convinced herself that I was unfit or unstable or incapable. I asked Ryan if he believed any of that. His eyes widened, and he shook his head quickly, almost frantically. No, never. You are an incredible mother already. I know that. But Mom kept saying you were overwhelmed during pregnancy. She said you were depressed. She said you were not coping well. My chest tightened. I stared at him. She said those things. Did you agree? His lips parted, but no sound came. That silence was louder than anything he could have said. I had struggled during pregnancy, yes. I had cried more easily. I had become anxious. I had worried constantly about the birth. But never once had I been unable to care for myself or my baby. Lorraine had weaponized normal vulnerability into a justification for her delusion. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. A question formed sharp and painful. Did you tell her when I went into surgery? Did you tell her I needed an emergency C-section? His face collapsed into guilt. I did not want to scare her, but she asked if everything was okay. I said you were having complications. I was panicking. I told her I needed support. I am so sorry. A heavy silence filled the room. He had told her exactly what she needed to hear to fuel her narrative that I was fragile, unstable, incapable, and she used it. I asked him where he had been since leaving the house after the police arrived. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes avoiding mine. I drove around. I went to Mom's house. She was not there. I tried calling her. She did not answer. I left messages. She never called back. I could not think. I was terrified she had gotten herself into something serious. I wanted to come back to the hospital, but I was scared of what you would say. I was scared you would not want to see me. That fear should not have outweighed your responsibility, I whispered, feeling my throat burn. You left me. You left our daughter. You left us on the day she was born. What I did not say but felt deeply was this. You left me to fight your mother alone. He covered his face with both hands again. His shoulders shook once, then twice, and suddenly he was crying. Deep, heavy sobs he tried to swallow but could not. I watched him numb. A part of me understood that he had been raised inside a life where guilt and obligation were twisted into obedience. A part of me knew he had been conditioned to prioritize Lorraine above all else. But another part, a larger part, whispered that he was still a grown man, a husband, a father, someone who had made choices, and those choices had left me alone and vulnerable at the moment I needed support the most. He finally looked up at me, tears running down his cheeks. I messed up. I know I did. I should have stayed. I should have protected you. I should have never let her get this far. I do not know how to fix this. I said nothing for several seconds. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since the camera footage. Did you have any idea what she planned? Anything at all? Ryan shook his head fiercely. No. I swear to you, I knew she had opinions. I knew she was overbearing, but I never imagined she would go into our house. I never imagined she would touch our things. I never imagined she would bring someone with her. I believed him, but believing him did not undo the damage. I told him that the detective would be contacting him soon, that there would be an investigation, that Lorraine could face charges. The look of devastation that crossed his face almost softened me. Almost. Then he whispered something that ignited a fire in my chest. She thought she was helping. That sentence, that tiny, misguided excuse, shattered any remaining sympathy I had. Helping. She thought she was helping by trying to take my baby, helping by breaking into our home, helping by preparing guardianship papers, helping by bringing a strange man into my nursery, helping by manipulating him into abandoning me at the hospital. I stared at him with a clarity I had not felt all day. That is not helping Ryan. That is control. That is delusion. That is danger. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly, as if the truth was finally sinking into the parts of him he had avoided for years. You are right, he whispered. I know you are right. But she is still my mother. I leaned back, my body aching with exhaustion and heartbreak. And I am your wife, and she almost cost us our child. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. In that moment, I understood something painful and irrevocable. Ryan was not the architect of what was happening, but he was not entirely innocent either. He was a product of Lorraine, shaped by her grip, softened by her pressure, paralyzed by her expectations. And unless he confronted that reality, unless he chose a different path, he would always be an extension of her. I looked down at my daughter, the tiny miracle sleeping peacefully despite the chaos swirling around her, and I made a quiet promise to myself. I would protect her, even if I had to protect her from her own family. Ryan finally whispered, "What do you want me to do?" I met his eyes. For the first time since I had known him, I saw fear of losing something more powerful than his fear of disappointing his mother. Tell the truth, I said. All of it. To the detective. To yourself. And choose the family you want to keep. His eyes widened, and in the heavy silence that followed, the entire trajectory of our marriage trembled like a fault line ready to break. Detective Ortiz returned the following morning, her expression composed but edged with the seriousness of someone who had spent the night piecing together the beginnings of a case that could unfold in multiple directions. I sat at the dining table with my daughter in my arms, wincing each time the incision pulled, and Ryan sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. The detective placed a slim folder on the table and began with a calm but firm tone that made my stomach knot. We need to move forward with formal statements. What you witnessed on the camera combined with the physical evidence found in the nursery constitutes probable cause for several potential charges. I felt Ryan stiffen beside me, but I forced myself to sit straighter despite the ache in my body. The detective opened the folder and listed the possibilities in a steady voice. Unauthorized entry, tampering with residential property, custodial interference, conspiracy to interfere with guardianship. Each word felt heavier than the last, falling into the quiet space of our dining room like stones sinking to the bottom of a lake. Ryan's jaw tightened and he looked at the floor. I stared at the detective. She continued explaining that the presence of a stranger, the duffel bag, and the partially torn envelope in the nursery indicated planning, not a spontaneous decision or misunderstanding. I told her about the blanket embroidered with Carter, about the way Lorraine had carefully assessed the room, about the tone in her voice when she said I would not be strong enough to raise my own daughter. The detective nodded and took notes without interrupting. She asked Ryan to recount everything he had heard from his mother the day before. He stumbled through his version, explaining how Lorraine had sent panicked messages about a break and how she insisted someone had been near the house, how he had rushed home without thinking. The detective listened carefully, and when he finished, she asked a question so directly that Ryan flinched. "Do you believe your mother fabricated the emergency to get you away from the hospital?" Ryan hesitated, and that hesitation felt like another betrayal, even though his answer eventually came. "Yes, I think she did." The detective nodded as if she had expected it. Then, she set her pen down and said, "We need to locate her. She has not returned home. She is not answering calls, and the man from the camera has been identified as Calvin Ross." Ryan blinked in confusion, but I recognized the name. Calvin Ross. The detective confirmed what she had told me briefly the night before. He had prior charges for breaking and entering petty theft and assisting in illegal property removal. He was someone Lorraine had hired in the past for small jobs, including installing shelving and hauling furniture. His record was minor, but pointed to the fact that he was not simply a handyman, but someone accustomed to bending rules. The detective added that the police had already tried contacting him at his last known address, but he had not been seen since the previous afternoon. I tightened my grip around my daughter, feeling the threat of everything rising again. The detective said the next step was to take my formal statement at the station or at home, whichever I preferred given my medical recovery. I chose home. She positioned herself at the end of the table, recorder ready, and I began recounting everything in chronological order. From the moment I opened the camera app to the second the screen went black, I described every word, every facial expression, every object I had seen in that nursery. As I spoke, the detective asked clarifying questions, making sure the record was precise. She asked whether Lorraine had any legal rights to enter the house. No. Whether anyone had given her permission to take items from the nursery. No. Whether she had ever mentioned guardianship documents to me before. No. Whether I had ever signed anything that could be remotely interpreted as giving her control. Absolutely not. When I finished, the detective turned to Ryan for his formal statement. His words faltered at first, but he pushed through, admitting more clearly this time what he had struggled to articulate earlier: that his mother had a history of overstepping, that she had pressured him in the past into signing documents he did not fully understand, that she believed she always knew best, that she had a way of manipulating him with guilt until he felt obligated to comply. Even hearing him admit it out loud did not undo the damage, but it mattered. When he finished, Detective Ortiz leaned back in her chair and said something that made my pulse stop for a beat. "Lorraine is not just overbearing. What she did was calculated. People do not prepare guardianship papers or bring assistance into someone else's home without believing they have a right to intervene. That level of entitlement often escalates." She paused, then letting the weight of the words settle. "We need to act quickly." She asked if I wanted to pursue a protective order. My answer came without hesitation. Yes. I want one immediately. She nodded as if expecting the answer and explained that the process would involve filing a sworn affidavit outlining the events, after which a judge would review it the same day due to the involvement of a newborn. She also explained that a protective order would restrict Lorraine from contacting me, approaching the house, or approaching the baby in any setting, including medical appointments. Ryan swallowed hard and looked away, the shame unmistakable. The detective said she would help file the paperwork that afternoon. As she gathered her materials, she informed us of something else. Lorraine had called the police earlier, claiming she had been threatened by an unknown man near a grocery store, but there was no record of a report filed. Her phone had pinged from a location several miles away from the store at the time she claimed the incident happened. She was lying to someone, or hiding, or building a counter-narrative. The detective stood and closed her folder. "If she contacts either of you, do not respond. Save every message, save every voicemail, save every call log." She looked at me specifically, then lowering her voice. "Women in your position often underestimate their instincts. Do not do that. You knew something was wrong before anyone else did. You were right. Trust that. Her words made my vision blur with emotion. After she left, I sank back into my chair, holding my daughter close. Ryan hovered near the table, shifting his weight nervously like he wanted to help, but did not know how. I asked him where the guardianship papers had come from. He admitted that he had seen Lorraine print similar forms before, but insisted he had not helped her with the documents found in the nursery. I believed he had not physically helped, but emotionally, psychologically, historically, he had enabled her for years. Ryan asked if I thought he was a danger to the baby. I stared at him for a long moment and shook my head slowly. I do not think you want to hurt us, but I do think you let her hurt us, and that is something you need to reckon with. He closed his eyes as if my words pierced him. I told him he needed to meet with the detective alone to tell her everything to stop defending Lorraine, even in his silence. He nodded, then whispered, "I will do whatever you need. Anything." The doorbell rang around noon, startling both of us. The detective had arranged for an officer to deliver the protective order packet so I could review it before filing. As I read through it, the language felt both clinical and painfully personal. Petitioner fears harm. Petitioner believes respondent may attempt to interfere with custody. Petitioner reports unauthorized entry and concerning behavior. Petitioner requests no contact provisions. I signed the forms with a shaky hand, feeling a mixture of empowerment and grief. Empowerment because I was taking back control. Grief because it should never have come to this. Later that afternoon, a family lawyer named Susan Lee arrived at my home, referred by the detective. She was calm, sharp, direct, someone who had seen decades of messy family cases and carried the quiet strength of a person who had fought battles on behalf of people who felt powerless. She sat with me in the kitchen and explained the legal framework clearly. The guardianship form Lorraine had attempted to use had no validity without both parents' signatures. The presence of the form, however, combined with the break-in, could be used to support a civil claim and strengthen the protective order. She asked if I wanted to pursue temporary sole custody. The question hit me like a weight. I looked down at my daughter sleeping in the bassinet and felt something shift inside me. "Yes," I said softly. "I think I do." Ryan, standing near the hallway, inhaled sharply but did not argue. Instead, he asked the lawyer what he needed to do to prove he was not complicit. She told him the best thing he could do was cooperate fully, document his communications with his mother, attend interviews, and accept responsibility where it belonged. After the meeting ended, the detective returned with an update. They had located Calvin's vehicle abandoned near a storage facility. They were checking surveillance cameras. As for Lorraine, her phone had been active twice, but not long enough to trace. The detective believed she was hiding, or regrouping. Ryan sat on the couch with his head in his hands, whispering, "I cannot believe this." I believed it. I believed everything now. By evening, the officer returned with notification that a judge had granted the temporary protective order. Lorraine was legally barred from contacting me, entering my property, or seeing my daughter. I clutched the paper as if it were a shield. But even with legal protection, one truth gnawed at me. Lorraine had crossed a line that could not be undone, and the consequences were just beginning. The conference room at Susan Lee's law office looked nothing like the setting where a family would confront a crisis. Yet the sterile brightness of the lights, the gloss of the polished table, and the quiet hum of the air conditioning made everything feel more severe, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the truth to uncoil. I sat with my daughter in her carrier beside me, still bruised from exhaustion and recovery, while Susan organized documents and Detective Ortiz positioned herself near the door with an expression that gave away nothing. Ryan sat to my right, his leg bouncing in an uneven rhythm, nervous energy radiating off him as if he were bracing for whatever was coming. Then the door opened and Lorraine walked in with the kind of rigid poise I had seen countless times before. Chin lifted, shoulders back, lips pressed into a thin, confident line. She gave me a single glance, one that carried the same superiority she had used on me since the day I married her son. And then she looked at the detective as if Ortiz were an inconvenience rather than a threat. "Thank you for meeting with me," Lorraine said, her voice steady, almost amused, as if she were the one hosting this gathering. I could tell she thought this was her stage, her chance to regain control, to twist the narrative back into whatever shape benefited her. Susan motioned for her to sit, and Lorraine lowered herself into the chair across from me with a smoothness that felt rehearsed. I suppose we all know why we are here, she began in a tone that suggested she believed everyone in the room needed her to explain the situation. There have been accusations, wild ones, and misunderstandings that I would like cleared up. Her gaze moved to me, cool and dismissive. Emily, dear, I know things have been emotional since the birth, but running to the police and filing these extreme orders was unnecessary. You are not thinking clearly. I felt my pulse spike, but I forced myself to stay silent as Susan responded with a calm, practiced firmness. We are here because there was an unauthorized entry into their home, because your presence on the nursery camera raises legal concerns, and because a man with a criminal record was seen with you. Lorraine waved her hand as if swatting away an insect. Calvin is harmless. The detective leaned forward slightly. You know him well. Of course I do, Lorraine said lightly. I hire him from time to time when I need help around the house. He is reliable, he is discreet. He knows how to handle sensitive situations without making a fuss. The phrase sensitive situations made a chill crawl across my spine. Susan asked evenly, Can you explain why he was inside Emily and Ryan's home without their knowledge or consent? Lorraine gave a small laugh. Because someone had to act. Someone had to step in before things spiraled into something dangerous. She looked directly at me, then her eyes sharp with clipped conviction. You are not stable. You are recovering from surgery exhausted and emotional, and Ryan is overwhelmed and inexperienced. The baby needed a safer environment. I inhaled slowly, trying not to react, but Lorraine's voice sharpened as she leaned in as if her certainty made her bold. I went to the house to prepare the nursery for the transition. It was supposed to be simple. We would take the baby home with me for a few weeks. Emily, you need rest, real rest, and Ryan would benefit from time to think without distraction. I blinked in disbelief as the detective spoke. You mean you intended to remove the baby from the home without Emily's consent? Lorraine did not even hesitate. I intended to protect my granddaughter. You people keep calling it removal as if I were planning something sinister. It is not sinister for a grandmother to step in when a mother is unfit. The room went silent. Ryan's breath hitched beside me. Susan spoke with clinical precision. Lorraine, did you or did you not instruct Mr. Calvin Ross to assist you on the property? Lorraine's lips curved into a small, cold smile. Of course I did. He carried the bag and handled the heavy items. I am 60 years old. I am not going to drag boxes myself. The detective lifted a page from her folder. And did you instruct him to enter the nursery? Lorraine responded instantly. Yes. He needed to gather the baby's essentials so we could get her settled at my house. My body went cold. There it was. She was confessing openly, almost proudly. Susan exchanged a subtle glance with the detective and asked, Why did you believe you had the authority to relocate the baby? Lorraine's eyes narrowed and her entire posture shifted, revealing the deeper layer of arrogance beneath her controlled surface. Because Ryan is my son, because this family has always been under my care, because I have kept things together for decades while others fell apart, and because I knew Emily would resist even if it was for the best. She paused and then added with chilling certainty, I had papers ready. They were not legal yet, but they would have been. We were simply getting a head start. The detective's voice sharpened. Papers. You mean the temporary guardianship documents found in the nursery? Yes, Lorraine answered, completely unfazed. I prepared them so the transition would be smoother. Ryan could sign once he calmed down. Emily, of course, would eventually understand. She said it with the ease of someone discussing routine errands, not confessing to attempted custodial interference. The detective's tone hardened. Lorraine, you do understand that what you are describing is a criminal offense. Lorraine's brows lifted in mild annoyance. It is only a criminal offense if people insist on making it one. I was trying to prevent a crisis. I was doing what Emily was too fragile to do, and Calvin knew this. He has helped with delicate matters before. That was it. The confession was complete, voluntary, cold, calculated, and flawlessly incriminating. Susan placed her hands on the table, her expression firm. Mrs. Carter, based on your statements today and the evidence obtained so far, you have admitted to unauthorized entry, attempted interference with custody, and conspiracy with a known offender. Before she could finish, Lorraine cut in with a scoff. Do not be dramatic. I was securing my granddaughter's future. The detective stood slowly, her voice level and authoritative. Lorraine Carter, you are under arrest. Lorraine's head snapped toward her, genuine disbelief breaking across her composed mask for the first time. Excuse me. Detective Ortiz continued without pause. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Lorraine stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor, eyes blazing with outrage. This is absurd. I did nothing wrong. I am her grandmother. Grandmothers do not get arrested. But she was already being handcuffed, the metal clicking around her wrists as she struggled and demanded to speak to someone in charge. Ryan began to cry quietly beside me, tears sliding down his face as he whispered, Mom, what have you done? Lorraine shot him a look so sharp it seemed to slice the air. I did what you were too weak to do. The detective guided her toward the door as Lorraine shouted over her shoulder, This is not over, Emily. You cannot keep her from me. I will fix this. You will see. But the door closed behind her, cutting her voice off abruptly, leaving only the heavy silence that followed disaster and revelation. Ryan covered his face with his hands, and Susan exhaled slowly while I stared at the empty doorway, my heartbeat loud and uneven. My daughter slept peacefully beside me, unaware that her life had just been altered by a single moment of arrogance and truth. Lorraine had confessed, and nothing in our world would ever be the same. The hours after Lorraine's arrest felt strangely suspended, as if time had slowed into a heavy fog that wrapped itself around my body and refused to let go, leaving me moving through the world with a mix of numbness and raw nerves that throbbed with every heartbeat. When we finally returned home, the house felt unfamiliar too, still, too hollow, as though the walls remembered her presence and were bracing for her return, even though she was now sitting in a holding cell somewhere. I carried my daughter into the living room and lowered myself carefully onto the couch, feeling the pull of my incision and the heavier pull of fear and relief tangled together in a way that made my throat tighten. Ryan hovered in the doorway like a ghost who did not know where to stand, wringing his hands, watching me as if waiting for permission to speak. I did not have any words for him. Not then. Instead, I focused on my daughter, running my fingers gently along her tiny cheek, trying to anchor myself in the simple truth of her breathing, her warmth, her soft whimpers as she slept. I should have felt safe, but my body remained tense, shoulders locked, muscles trembling beneath my skin because the image of Lorraine in the nursery replayed in my mind like a looping nightmare. Every time I blinked, I could see her hands reaching toward the crib, her cold calculation, her voice dripping with disdain as she decided that I did not deserve to mother my own child. I pressed a hand to my chest, forcing myself to take slow breaths, but even breathing felt like a challenge. The therapist at the hospital had warned me about postpartum anxiety, about the way trauma layered onto hormonal imbalance could turn even the strongest women into trembling versions of themselves, but I had nodded politely, thinking I would be fine. Now, sitting in my own living room guarding the carrier like someone would come bursting in at any moment, I realized I was not fine, not even close. Ryan finally stepped into the room and lowered himself onto the armchair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Emily, he whispered, his voice breaking. I am so sorry. I said nothing. He tried again, running a hand through his hair. I did not know she would do this. I swear I did not. The apology floated in the air, thin and fragile, unable to make contact with the bruised place inside me. I finally looked at him, exhaustion making my voice flat. Ryan, you left me. You left me in a hospital bed hours after surgery. You left me because she said jump, and you jumped. His shoulders crumpled. I know, and I cannot take it back, but I want to fix it. Tell me what to do. I stared at him, searching for something that might resemble the man I had married, but all I saw was a grown child who had never learned to cut the cord. My daughter whimpered in her sleep, and the sound pulled me back from the edge of an emotional cliff. I reached into the carrier and lifted her gently into my arms, inhaling her baby scent, feeling her small weight settle into me like a grounding force. Ryan watched, eyes glistening, and whispered, I want to protect you both. I do. I just never realized how much she controlled me until she was gone. I believed he meant it. I believed he felt guilt, but guilt was not enough to rebuild trust. Not when I still felt my pulse spike every time I thought about being alone in this house. Not when I had spent an entire night praying my baby would not be taken. I felt detached from him, as if something inside me had snapped cleanly in half during the moment Lorraine confessed and was handcuffed. My body had remembered the betrayal, and it would not let me forget. Later that night, after I put the baby down in a bassinet beside the bed, I found myself pacing the hallway, checking the locks 3 times each, checking the windows, checking the back door, checking the baby monitor signals, checking everything until my hands shook and my breath shortened. When Ryan approached me, I flinched hard enough that he froze in place, his expression collapsing with pain. "I am not her," he whispered. "I am not going to hurt you." I leaned against the wall and covered my face, trying not to sob. I was not scared of him physically. I was scared of the blind spot he carried, the one that had opened the door to all of this. I was scared of the version of him that still might exist somewhere beneath the apology. He backed away slowly, giving me space, retreating to the living room where he slept on the couch without complaint. For the next few days, I moved through the house like a person recovering from a storm that had torn the roof off. I fed the baby pumped milk, took my pain medication, changed tiny diapers, and then sat awake in the dark while she slept because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lorraine's face, heard her voice, felt the terror of helplessness in my own body. On the 3rd day, my obstetrician insisted I speak with a postpartum therapist. I agreed, sitting in the bedroom with my daughter sleeping against my chest as the soft voice on the phone explained trauma responses, hypervigilance, maternal protectiveness, and the impact of betrayal by someone who should have been family. The therapist said the panic was normal. The trembling was normal. The anger was normal. The dreams, the flashbacks, the guilt, the fear, the distrust, all normal. But she also told me something that felt like a lump of truth lodged in my throat. You survived something that threatened your sense of safety as a mother. Healing will not happen overnight, even if the danger has passed. Lorraine's arrest did not magically make the house feel safe again. It did not erase the memory of seeing her hand reaching for my daughter's belongings. It did not erase the fact that Ryan had enabled her for years, or the reality that my life had nearly been uprooted in a single afternoon. The protective order arrived formally by mail on the 5th day, along with instructions about reporting violations, documenting concerns, and continuing therapy. I kept the paperwork in a drawer beside the bed, but I found myself checking it repeatedly, needing the reassurance of the legal language, the reminder that she was not allowed near us. Ryan tried to help. He cooked meals. He cleaned the house. He volunteered for every diaper change. He attended the first parenting class the court required without a single complaint. He walked the perimeter of the house each night to show me the locks were intact. He offered space. He apologized over and over, each one softer and more fragile than the last. But trauma is not something that resolves because someone tries. Trauma lingers. Trauma rewrites the body. And every time he said the words, "I am sorry," I felt a part of me fold deeper inward because the apology reminded me of the wound rather than healing it. Still, I could see the boy inside the man, the one who had been trained to obey his mother's voice like it was law. I could see the confusion, the grief, the self-loathing. In therapy, I admitted that I felt compassion for him and resentment at the same time. The therapist said it was common, especially for women whose partners were raised by controlling parents. "He is a victim," she said gently, "but that does not erase his responsibility. You can acknowledge both truths at once." That idea settled inside me like a stone at the bottom of a river, heavy but stable. I understood then that whatever happened in our marriage going forward, it would not be simple or quick. Trust would not return easily. Safety would not return easily. And motherhood in the wake of what happened felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying. I held my daughter every night, rocking her, gently whispering promises I was still learning how to keep. "I will protect you. I will keep you safe. I will never let anyone take you." These words became my anchor, the counterweight to every tremor of fear still trapped in my bones. And even though the house was quiet, even though Lorraine was gone, I could still feel the echo of her presence in every room. But slowly, day by day, breath by breath, I began to reclaim my home. and in the soft glow of the nightlight beside the bassinet, I began to reclaim myself. The legal process unfolded slowly at first, like a storm gathering on a distant horizon, but once it broke open, everything moved with a force that felt both overwhelming and strangely predictable, as if the truth had been pushing against a fragile wall for years and had finally cracked through. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Detective Ortiz called to inform me that Calvin had been found and taken into custody after officers traced him to an abandoned shed behind an auto shop where he had once worked. The detective's voice held no surprise when she said he had confessed within an hour of interrogation, admitting that Lorraine had hired him, instructed him, and promised payment once the baby was in her care. Calvin insisted he had not intended harm, but his admissions aligned perfectly with Lorraine's earlier confession, making the case airtight. His charges included breaking and entering criminal trespass and conspiracy to interfere with custody. Because he had a prior record, the prosecutors pushed for a sentence that reflected the seriousness of his involvement. A few weeks later, he accepted a plea deal for 18 months in state prison, the maximum the judge believed was appropriate for a case that involved no physical harm, but significant malicious intent. The news left me both relieved and shaken. It was surreal knowing that a stranger had been willing to step into my nursery and carry away belongings meant for my newborn child as if it were nothing more than a job. Yet, it was Lorraine's case that weighed heaviest because the legal system struggled to fit her actions neatly into the categories the law recognized. Prosecutors built their case around custodial interference, trespassing conspiracy, and attempted unlawful guardianship interference charges that were considered serious but not typically tied to long-term prison time unless violence or abduction occurred. I learned quickly that justice in the real world rarely looked like the dramatic courtroom scenes I had grown up watching on television. Instead, it was measured procedural, limited by statutes and evidence, and the small realities of what could be proven. The district attorney warned me that Lorraine's age, her lack of prior criminal history, and the fact that no actual removal of the baby occurred would mean the consequences would be more corrective than punitive. At first, I felt disappointed, almost cheated, of the sense of retribution that Hollywood had taught me to expect. But the therapist helped me see that justice in real life was not about dramatic endings. It was about boundaries being enforced, safety being affirmed, and truth being acknowledged. And in that sense, justice unfolded exactly as it needed to. The day of the hearing arrived, and I sat in the family court building holding my daughter, while Ryan sat several seats away, separated not by distance, but by everything we had not yet healed. Lorraine entered the courtroom handcuffed, escorted by deputies. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair less composed, her expression stripped of its confident veneer, but even diminished, she carried the same rigid posture, the same refusal to accept fault. When her charges were read aloud, she stared ahead without blinking, as if she were above the accusations being spoken. The prosecutor presented the evidence clearly and methodically: the camera footage, the guardianship forms, her confession, Calvin's corroborating statement, and the officer reports from the scene. The judge listened with the calm detachment of someone who had witnessed countless family catastrophes unfold in this very room. When it was time for Lorraine to speak, she rose slowly, hands trembling slightly. But even trembling, her voice carried the same cold arrogance. I did what I believed was necessary. Emily is not capable of caring for a child alone. I was acting in the baby's best interest. Nothing I did was malicious. The judge cut her off gently but firmly. Mrs. Carter, your belief that you know what is best does not give you the legal right to override parental custody, enter someone's home without permission, or involve a third party in a planned removal. Your intentions do not excuse your actions. Lorraine's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. The judge delivered the sentence with deliberate clarity. 12 months of supervised probation, mandatory counseling, a requirement to complete a family boundary education program, and a no-contact order lasting 3 years that prohibited her from contacting me or the baby directly or indirectly. She was forbidden from being within 300 feet of my home, my workplace, or my daughter's daycare or future school. She was also prohibited from possessing a house key or attempting to obtain one through any means. The judge emphasized that violation of the order would result in immediate arrest and potential jail time. As the gavel came down, a wave of relief washed through me so intensely I felt tears rise before I could stop them. It was not a harsh sentence, but it was a firm one. A legally binding wall between us and the woman who had nearly dismantled my world. After the hearing, Ryan approached me slowly, as if unsure whether he was allowed to step into my space. He whispered, "I am sorry for everything, for what she did, for what I allowed, for not protecting you when you needed me most." His voice cracked, and I could see genuine remorse written across his face, but the damage was not something an apology could undo. I told him the truth gently. "I am not ready to rebuild anything with you. I need to focus on our daughter and myself." He nodded with tears in his eyes, accepting the boundary without argument. The judge granted me temporary sole custody that day, citing concerns about Ryan's enmeshment with his mother and his inability to recognize the danger she posed. He was ordered to complete parenting classes and individual therapy before the court would consider expanding his visitation beyond supervised hours. Watching him process that reality was painful, but it was necessary. This was not about punishing him. It was about ensuring he could someday be the father our daughter deserved, a father capable of choosing her safety over loyalty to someone who never earned it. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a cautious rhythm defined by healing therapy appointments, legal paperwork, and slowly rediscovering what safety felt like. I saw Ryan during the supervised visits sitting across the room from me as he held our daughter with trembling hands and whispered gentle promises to her. I could see how deeply he loved her, but I also saw the layers of conditioning he had to unlearn. One afternoon, as I watched him cradle her with remarkable tenderness, it struck me that rebuilding trust with him was not impossible, but it needed time, boundaries, accountability, and genuine change. And for the first time, I believed he was capable of that work. But I was no longer the woman who would sacrifice herself to fix a broken man. I had become someone else, someone stronger, someone who understood that motherhood was not just about protecting a child from the world, but also protecting myself from the people who pretended to love while causing harm. Justice had not looked dramatic or cinematic, but it had been enough. It had created distance, accountability, and consequences. It had affirmed that what happened to us mattered. And as I carried my daughter out of the courthouse that day, sunlight warming her tiny face, I realized that justice was not the end of the story. It was the foundation for the new life we were about to build. 6 months later, the world felt different in a way that was not loud or dramatic, but steady and quietly life-altering, like a tide that had pulled back to reveal the shape of everything left standing after the storm. I moved into a small house on a quiet street lined with oak trees, a place with a fenced yard, soft morning light, and enough space for me to breathe without constantly checking over my shoulder. The first night I slept there, the baby monitor glowing softly on the nightstand, I realized I no longer felt the invisible pressure of Lorraine's presence lingering in the corners. The no-contact order worked like a shield I could finally trust, and though fear did not disappear overnight, it became smaller, more manageable, something I could set aside rather than something that controlled me. Therapy had become a weekly anchor, a place where I slowly untangled the knots left behind by trauma, betrayal, and exhaustion. My therapist reminded me often that safety is not just the absence of danger, but the presence of peace, and gradually I began to understand what that meant. I had started sleeping more, eating more, laughing, sometimes even rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten in the whirlwind of new motherhood and fear. My daughter, who had once seemed impossibly fragile, had grown into a curious, bright-eyed baby who loved reaching for sunlight streaming through the window and giggling whenever I made exaggerated faces. Watching her grow became the purest kind of healing, each milestone a reminder that life could continue, that hope could thrive even where fear had once rooted deeply. Ryan completed his court-ordered parenting classes and individual therapy, and though we interacted only during his supervised visits, I noticed changes in him too. He showed up early every time, prepared, engaged, quieter than before, but more thoughtful, more aware. The dynamic between us was no longer laced with the old imbalance, no longer burdened by Lorraine's hovering influence. He had started learning who he was without her voice in his ear, and though I was proud of him in a distant, cautious way, I remained firm in the boundaries I had set. Healing did not mean returning to what had been broken. It meant building what was right. One afternoon after a supervised session, Ryan approached me with a calmness that surprised me. He gently handed back our daughter, then said softly, "I am learning how to be my own person. I am learning how to be her father, not my mother's son." His words moved something inside me. Not romantic love, not nostalgia, but a quiet respect for the effort it took to break lifelong patterns. I told him I wished him well truly, and I meant it. The life we once had was gone, but perhaps something healthier could grow in the space where control and fear had once lived. I no longer felt obligated to fix him, and that freedom felt like fresh air filling my lungs. As spring warmed into early summer, I settled into routines that made me feel human again. Morning walks with the stroller, Saturday trips to the farmer's market, coffee on the small porch while my daughter babbled beside me. I installed new security cameras not because I feared Lorraine returning, but because reclaiming my home meant reclaiming my sense of power. The cameras were tools, now not symbols of terror. In the months since the court hearing, I never once heard from Lorraine, not directly or indirectly. The detective confirmed she attended her mandated counseling sessions, though predictably with the kind of performative compliance toxic people rely on when they have no other choice. But she stayed away, completely, and that was enough. One day, I drove past the old house Ryan and I had once shared, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No grief, no anger, no longing. It was simply a building that belonged to a different chapter of my life. I realized then that healing sometimes looks like indifference replacing pain. About 2 months after moving into the new house, I received an email from one of the postpartum support group leaders asking if I would be willing to speak at a meeting. At first, I hesitated the idea of telling my story to strangers, stirring up old discomfort, but something inside me nudged me forward, so I agreed. When the day came, I sat in a circle of women in a softly lit room, each of them carrying stories etched into their eyes the same way mine had once been. I spoke honestly about everything from the panic in the hospital, to the camera footage that shattered my world, to the terror and strength intertwined in the days that followed. When I finished, a woman across from me wiped tears from her cheeks and whispered, "I thought I was alone." That moment felt like a click, like a lock finally turning. I understood then that my story was not just something I survived, but something that could help others survive too. Life continued folding forward in gentle waves after that. I returned to teaching part-time, easing back into the classroom with a patience and presence that somehow felt deeper than before. My colleagues welcomed me with warmth, and my students' bright faces reminded me daily why I had chosen this profession. Teaching gave me purpose outside motherhood, a reminder that I was still a whole person with dreams and talents. On warm evenings, I would sit on the porch holding my daughter as fireflies flickered across the yard. I would tell her stories about the day she was born, stories softened by time, leaving out the parts she was too young to understand, but keeping the parts she would need someday. "You saved me," I would whisper into her soft hair, "and I saved us too." One night, as the sun set in shades of gold and lavender, I realized I no longer held my breath when shadows moved across the walls. I no longer jumped at unexpected sounds. Peace had finally taken root deep inside me. The fear was still there, tucked away, but it no longer owned me. And that was enough. Standing by the living room window, holding my daughter close, I looked out at the quiet street and felt a sense of closure settle over me like a gentle blanket. The chapter with Lorraine was over. The chapter with Ryan was changing into something defined by co-parenting without chaos, and the life ahead of me was mine to shape. My daughter stirred in my arms, her small fingers curling into the fabric of my shirt, and I kissed her forehead softly. Family is not defined by blood or by tradition or by anyone's expectations. It is defined by safety, by love, by the courage to protect what matters. I had learned that the hard way, but I had learned it fully. As I stood there watching my new life unfold through the window's reflection, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Freedom. True, quiet, steady freedom. And for the first time, I knew I would never lose it again. If you are still here at the end of this story, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, not as a narrator, but as someone who knows what it feels like to walk through fear, betrayal, and the slow rebuilding of a life you thought would look very different. Stories like this hit hard because so many of us grew up in families where silence was expected, where loyalty was demanded even when it hurt, and where the people who were supposed to protect us were sometimes the ones who caused the most damage. Maybe you have lived through something similar. Maybe you raised your kids in a house where you felt like you were walking on eggshells. Maybe you had a mother-in-law who tried to take control of your home, or a partner who never stood up for you when it mattered. Or maybe you were the one who broke the cycle and made sure your children would never know that kind of pain. Whatever your story is, you are not alone, and you never were. So many people watch these stories and say, "I wish she had left sooner," or "Why did she keep giving them chances?" But that is the quiet truth of trauma. You do not see the danger clearly until you are finally standing on the other side of it. You do not know how strong you are until you look back and realize you carried yourself through moments that should have broken you. If you have ever stayed in a toxic family because you hoped they would change, or because you feared what would happen if you walked away, or because you thought love meant endurance, I want you to hear this. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that. And if you finally made the choice to protect yourself, even if it took years, that is strength. That is courage. That is healing. I want to hear from you because stories like yours matter. They help other people feel less alone. They remind younger generations that they do not have to repeat the past. If you have a moment, tell me where you are watching from. Tell me how old you were when you first realized a family member was hurting you, instead of helping you tell me what made you finally say enough. Your story might be the exact words someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you are someone who has never been through anything like this, but you watched all the way to the end, I want to thank you. Whether you realize it or not, you are part of creating a space where survivors feel safe enough to speak. You are part of reminding the world that boundaries are healthy, that love should not come with conditions, that no parent or spouse or relative has the right to control another person's life. Before you go, take a moment and check in with yourself. Are you safe? Are you respected? Do the people in your circle make you feel small or make you feel seen? If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of a room you used to stand in, or a voice you used to fear, or a version of yourself you had to leave behind, I want you to know something. You deserve peace. You deserve safety. You deserve a life that feels like yours. Thank you for being here with me tonight. If you have a story of your own, I am listening, always.